Well, thanks for joining me today with the Apologist bookshelf. Gary Zacharias here. There's a book called Truth Changes Everything. Dr. Jeff Myers is the author of it. He's president of Summit Ministries. I hope you've heard of that. That's a great organization that takes the next generation, equips and supports them to embrace God's truth and value a biblical worldview. Boy, do we need that today. So this book, Truth Changes Everything, I've done, I think, 2 previous podcasts on it. One was How to Tell the Truth and Be Nice. That's a good one. And Does Truth Matter? So you can look back. If you're on Podbean, you can put the title in. You can find out which podcast covered that. Well, the book, the big picture of the book is if you believe there's truth out there, then it changes your life. And how Jesus followers have used the idea of truth, not just, oh, this is my way, but there are dozens of ways to live. But they've believed that, no, this is the best way for human flourishing. And so chapters like Jesus followers have changed how we value human life, how we care for one another, how we learn and grow, how we've changed the world of science, the world of the arts, politics, pursuit of justice, how we work. Just some really good sections here. You know, if we believe it's true, we should be changing things. And we have for 2,000 years. Well, I'd like to do chapter, let's see, let me back it up here. Let's do chapter 4. Can truth be known? And how would we know it? I like that. Can truth be known? We don't hear a lot about that these days, do we? Well, the truth viewpoint says some things are really obvious. It's raining or it's not raining. You just stick your head out the window. Nobody says, well, it might be raining for you, but not for me. That's different, isn't it? So that's called the truth viewpoint, capital T, saying it is or it's not raining. Well, the question is, of course, truth exists and can be known. Okay, but some things are less obvious than that. And of course, people who believe there is truth with a capital T, that it can be known, don't claim to know all of what's true. Yeah, good point. But he says there are some points that truth advocates will use to make their case, to say there are reasons to believe truth can be known. And this is the heart of the chapter. Why do we think truth can be known? Well, here are several reasons. For one thing, he says, he calls it truth rises. Says truth seems to rise to the surface, even when people deny its existence. I mean, if you hear people say things like, well, truth can't be known. Really? Well, that's claiming to know something is true. Or if somebody else says, you can't know what's true for me, they're claiming to know what's true for you as well as for them. And so if somebody says to you, X is wrong, something is wrong, you can say, what's your understanding of right and wrong based on? Is that true? How do you know? So truth seems to come out. It's hard to keep it down. Here's a second point, another reason to believe the truth can be known. Things and ideas have essences. Now that sounds kind of fuzzy, but here's what they're talking about. Some people say, well, we can't really see what exists. We just interpret it all in our own way. If you say, oh, I like this Ferrari, it's a cool sports car, you're not really making a statement about the car. It's just your personal belief of what's cool. Okay, but here's a philosopher, Husserl, I think, back in the 1800s up to the early 1900s. He says, yeah, but thoughts and ideas have essences. They're qualities that make them what they are. Thoughts and ideas are about things, and they're intended to be about things. So let's say you're at work, and a coworker says, well, no religious belief can be known to be true. And of course, that's a statement about religion that your coworker thinks is true, but get beyond the obvious contradiction. What your coworker is talking about, think about that sentence. No religious belief can be known for true. That belief is talking about things of existence and religion and belief and knowledge and truth. There's an essence to them. So they mean something to the coworker who's just said it. So each word can be defined and each conveys a meaning and not other meanings. So the idea is that the idea of essences points to the existence of truth. So ideas like justice and liberty can be known to be meaningful. If you don't have meaningful ideas, there's no such thing as social interaction. It's just pointless. For example, if you talk about injustice, well, if people don't know what justice is, then you're just babbling. Here's a third reason to believe truth can be known. Words are meaningful. So people who advocate truths, just a whole bunch of truths, relativism, say the truth cannot be known, but they say that's a true statement, but that's self-referentially absurd, isn't it? Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, if words don't refer to real things, why would we treat the words themselves as meaningful? So if you go into a store in France, he says, as an example, and you point to a chair, you say, "What's that?" The clerk might say, "Une chaise." Though the clerk and you are using different words, you're intentionally talking about that object. There it is, right there, not any other object in that store. So words do mean something. You think about it, he says every act of cruelty and violence against people begin with word games. They say sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but names will never hurt me. Oh, that's not true. In Rwanda, Hutu leaders talked about the Tutsis as cockroaches, and then they called for their extermination, and thousands died. What the Nazis called Jews, vermin, to justify the Holocaust. So somebody said when words lose their meaning, people lose their lives. So that's another reason that we really do believe truth can be known. Here's another reason. We can make rational arguments. You can use reason to make wise personal decisions about reality. So if you're standing on top of a building, doesn't have a railing, you don't put your foot right on the edge there. You're going to fall over. Reason connects you to reality. It allows you to approximate truth. Gravity will take hold and down you go. So it helps you make good decisions. So it said God's acts are not beyond knowing or describing. Faith is not outside the bounds of reasoned inquiry. People might disagree, sure. But even when they do, they assume that their words and ours are intelligible. There's no escaping reason. Here's another idea of why we think truth can be known. There is a knowable difference between facts and opinions. Yeah, that seems obvious, doesn't it? A fact is something you know to be true. An opinion is an interpretation of facts. And some people confuse the two. They say things like, restrictions against abortion do violence to women, or rich people are evil. But those are opinions, and they're masking them, pretending that they're facts. Yeah, so that's a really good point. We can know the difference, he says, between facts and opinions. We use the scientific method to take a look at the world, don't we? We observe it and we measure it and put it in test tubes and we repeat experiments. In public policy, we examine financial and social costs versus the benefit that might come from a proposed law. But moral facts also exist in addition to these scientific and historical ones. So if somebody says it's wrong to murder or it's wrong to cheat on a test, those are not just opinions. Moral facts can be objectively known. Evidence can be produced to demonstrate that they're true. And in fact, I'm going to look this up, but he says here there's a philosopher, Richard Beis, I guess, B-E-I-S, has collected an extensive list of moral absolutes that are universally demonstrated in every culture that anthropologists have studied. So if you ever hear somebody say, oh, different cultures have different ideas of truth, no, there are moral absolutes that they share. Every culture that anthropologists have studied share. Now, in the book here, it says you can go to, let me go to it. I'll go ahead and give you the place you can go find it if you care to. It's Richard Beis, B-E-I-S, and this is his article, quote, Some Contributions of Anthropology to Ethics, end quote. And it's in a magazine called The Thomist, Thomist, number 27, number 2 for that year. That's April 1964. And it's from pages 174 to 223. And it was quoted in another person's book. That's Gardner is the author, Gardner, The Book of Absolutes. So let me just list a few of these for you, because I get so tired of hearing that every culture has its own standards. There's no agreement. They're all different. No. So here's some of them that Vice was able to collect. Prohibition of murder or maiming without justification. Prohibition of lying, at least in certain areas like oaths. The right to own property, land or clothing, tools. Preference of the common good over individual good, and sexual restrictions. So those are just some, but there are many more that this philosopher has accumulated. So I think that's really useful. He says in the next section of this chapter, many philosophers find discussions about truth meaningful even though they're not Christians. So he has a footnote on that, but I'm not going to take the time to do that. Let's go to the New Testament. What does it mean to say that Jesus is the truth? He says, actually, if you go back and take a look at history, many of the greatest minds embraced a belief in God. Plato, Aristotle, St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, William of Ockham, René Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Locke, Berkeley, Kant, Hegel. They were all theists in one kind of form or another. And then I really like this. They found a quote by David Hume. The atheists love him. But here's what Hume said. The whole frame of nature bespeaks an intelligent author, and no rational inquirer can, after serious reflection, suspend his belief a moment with regard to the primary principles of genuine theism and religion. That was David Hume. And the Bible moves beyond this kind of abstract idea of God. The Bible all the way through says that the very heart of reality is a God, and this God is personal. He knows and he cares. Powerful, huh? So it says, in the beginning, and he says, look at the gospel accounts. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now the word used there is the word logos. And that's the same Greek word that the philosophers used to use to describe the obviousness of reality. So John wanted his readers to understand that logos is not just a concept. It was Jesus. He is reality. And then later John says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory is of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So not only can God be known, but he's shown in his creation. God took on a body. He became incarnate. What does the Bible say about Jesus being the truth? Well, early Christians taught that God was not only out there, but that he was here with us. He was among us. In his writings, John had all sorts of reasons for us to believe that Jesus really was the answer the world was looking for. He says Jesus said the Spirit of God would guide his disciples into all truth. He prayed that his disciples would be sanctified in the truth. When he was on trial before Pilate, remember what he said? His purpose in the world was to bear witness to the truth. So many believed, of course, the disciples' testimony. There were some certainly that rejected it. It says, what a claim that Jesus came up with. Ancient philosophers wanted a meaningful life. They wanted to answer questions like, what is good? What's true? What's beautiful? And Jesus then says, I am the way and the truth and the life. He seemed to be saying, here is the answer to the philosopher's quest. Good point. So what difference does it make to say that Jesus is the truth? So what? And he says it opens a world of wonder. It restores hope. It unleashes good in the world. It's transformative. Because for Christians, the claim that Jesus is the truth is good news. It's just not good because we get eternal life, although that's great. It's good because it gives us direction when we feel aimless or stressed out, or if we're tired or insecure. It's the answer to everything from marriage, global conflict, anything like that. It's all good news. Of course, he said it was just mind-boggling at the time of John, the idea that one man could bring enlightenment to the whole world. Many rolled their eyes. Really? The answer to all our problems was born of a virgin and rose from the dead? Yeah. But the Jesus Revolution offered both a way to find truth and a reason to live for it here and now, and not just in heaven someday. Remember, Marx said religion is the opiate of the people. That wasn't the case for Christianity. It offered a way to live. Super revolutionary. And of course, why is it so revolutionary? Because Jesus came back from the dead. Gary Habermas says that's the most verifiable fact of ancient history. Jesus appeared to his disciples fully alive after 3 days after his death. And they couldn't stop talking about it. Some revolutionaries call their followers to vengeance, not Jesus. He was an even more dangerous kind of revolutionary. He called his followers not to defeat their enemies militarily, but to win them over through love. So as he ends the chapter, he says the church needs to understand its own beliefs. What we believe about God, the author says, the world and ourselves, that affects all these hundreds and thousands of decisions we make every day. I do a talk on worldviews, and that's exactly right. If you, from your starting point, what's your big picture of life? Is there something beyond us, or are we it? If we think there's more, if we think there's a God, if we think Jesus died for us, we live a very different life. Ideas have consequences. The Bible, Christians say, is God's revelation about how to make decisions the best way possible to help us flourish. Now, it does have rules in it, the author says, but following the rules is not the point. Drivers don't get behind the wheel just to see how many traffic laws they can obey. They drive to get places. So the Bible has rules, but it's to guide us toward a world of flourishing and order and blessing. And I always think about J. Warner Wallace has a book called The Truth and True Crime. And that's exactly what that book talks about. That's one of the most influential books I've read in a long time. And he talks chapter after chapter about what makes people flourish, what makes life for people, what's the best way you can live. And he has like 14 or 15 different ways. And every one of those is backed up because it's what the Bible teaches. So for worldviews, for a way to live, the Bible contains the best possible one. So at the end of the chapter, kind of sad here, he said, pastors and Christian teachers always say truth can be known in the person of Jesus, but so they're not getting through to their congregations very well. Here's a poll result. George Barna, only 19% of church-going, born-again Christians hold a biblical worldview. Think about that, 19%. So only 1 out of 5 have a biblical worldview, meaning they believe Jesus is the only way, they trust the Bible, and things like that. So he says the other 81% either aren't aware of or they disagree with core Christian doctrines about Jesus and God and the Bible and sin and ethical living. And as he wraps up the chapter, he says, having a biblical worldview means to be on board with Jesus' revolutionary transformation project. History is in the making. We're part of it. History is going somewhere. It's not just a bunch of events that happened in the past. It's not dry. History is going someplace. It's not cyclical. And it's going there for a reason. He says over and over again, in different cultures, in different times, Christian believers have transformed their lives. They've lived differently. And it's consistent and it's coherent and it changes the society. So the conversion of many people to Christianity doesn't prove that Christianity is true, but he says it does illustrate its truth. The way of Jesus is not true because it works because it's true. And that's what the whole book is about. How the belief that Jesus is the truth has changed everything. And that's where these next few chapters come in. How has it changed how we learn? How has it changed for caring for individuals? How has it changed the world of science and the arts and politics and on and on? So if we believe it's true, and if we believe that we have been empowered and that history is going someplace, that's what we're supposed to be about, making a difference, making the world a better place. So yes, Christianity is great for the afterlife. Yeah, I'm looking forward. That's great. I'm so happy that because my sins have been taken care of, I can live with God forever. But right now, there's the good news, I think, that we can make a difference, that God has us here to transform this world to be a better place. Well, thanks for being part of this podcast today. Appreciate your interest.